question of secession and the immediate decision about Fort Sumter which it involved, the members of his cabinet were, like himself, compelled to rely on the professional advice of experienced army and navy officers. Since these differed radically in their opinions, the President's own powers of perception and logic were as capable of forming a correct decision as men who had been governors and senators. He had reached at least a partial decision in the memorandum he gave Fox to prepare ships for the Sumter expedition. It must, therefore, have been a great surprise to the President when, on April 1st, Secretary of State Seward handed him a memorandum setting forth a number of most extraordinary propositions. For a full enumeration of the items, the reader must carefully study the entire document, which is printed below in a footnote. But the principal points for which it had evidently been written and presented can be given in a few sentences. A month has elapsed, and the administration has neither a domestic nor a foreign policy. The administration must at once adopt and carry out a novel, radical, and aggressive policy. It must cease saying a word about slavery, and raise a great outcry about union. It must declare war against France and Spain, and combine and organize all the governments of North and South America in a crusade to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. This policy once adopted, it must be the business of some one incessantly to pursue it. "It is not in my especial province," wrote Mr. Seward, "but I neither seek to evade nor assume responsibility." This phrase, which is a key to the whole memorandum, enables the reader easily to translate its meaning into something like the following: After a month's trial, you, Mr. Lincoln, are a failure as President. The country is in desperate straits, and must use a desperate remedy. That remedy is to submerge the South Carolina insurrection in a continental war. Some new man must take the executive helm, and wield the undivided presidential authority. I should have been nominated at Chicago, and elected in November, but am willing to take your place and perform your duties. Why, William H. Seward, who is fairly entitled to rank as a great statesman, should have written this memorandum and presented it to Mr. Lincoln, has never been explained. Nor is it capable of explanation. Its suggestions were so visionary, its reasoning so fallacious, its assumptions so unwarranted, its conclusions so malapropos, that it falls below critical examination. Had Mr. Lincoln been an envious or a resentful man, he could not have wished for a better occasion to put a rival under his feet. The President doubtless considered the incident one of phenomenal strangeness, but it did not in the least disturb his unselfish judgment or mental equipoise. There was in his answer no trace of excitement or passion. He pointed out in a few sentences of simple, quiet explanation that what the administration had done was exactly a foreign and domestic policy which the Secretary of State himself had concurred in and helped to frame, only that Mr. Seward proposed to go further and give up Sumter. Upon the central suggestion that some one mind must direct, Mr. Lincoln wrote with simple dignity, quote, "If this must be done, I must do it. When a general line of policy is adopted, I apprehend that there is no danger of its being changed without good reason, or continuing to be a subject of unnecessary debate. Still, upon points arising in its progress, I wish, and suppose I am entitled to have, the advice of all the Cabinet." End quote. Mr. Lincoln's unselfish magnanimity is the central marvel of the whole affair. His reply ended the argument. Mr. Seward doubtless saw at once how completely he had put himself in the President's power. Apparently, neither of the men ever again alluded to the incident. No other persons, except Mr. Seward's son and the President's private secretary, ever saw the correspondence or knew of the occurrence. The President put the papers away in an envelope, and no word of the affair came to public until a quarter of a century later, when the details were published in Mr. Lincoln's biography. In one mind, at least, There was no further doubt that the cabinet had a master, for only some weeks later Mr. Seward is known to have written, "There is but one vote in the cabinet, and that is cast by the President." This mastery Mr. Lincoln retained with a firm dignity throughout his administration. When, near the close of the war, he sent Mr. Seward to meet the rebel commissioners at the Hampton Roads Conference, he finished his short letter of instructions with the imperative sentence, "You will not assume to definitely consummate anything." From this strange episode our narrative must return to the question of Fort Sumter. On April 4th official notice was sent to Major Anderson of the coming relief, with the instruction to hold out till the 11th or 12th if possible, but authorizing him to capitulate whenever it might become necessary to save himself and command. 2 days later the President sent a special messenger with written notice to the Governor of South Carolina that an attempt would be made to supply Fort Sumter with provisions only, and that if such attempt were not resisted, no further effort would be made to throw in men, arms, or ammunition, without further notice, or unless in case of an attack on the fort. The building of batteries around Fort Sumter had begun, under the orders of Governor Pickens, about the 1st of January, and continued with industry and energy; and about the 1st of March General Beauregard, an accomplished engineer officer, was sent by the Confederate government to take charge of and complete the works. On April 1st he telegraphed to Montgomery, "Batteries ready to open Wednesday or Thursday. What instructions?" At this point the Confederate authorities at Montgomery found themselves face to face with the fatal alternative either to begin war or to allow their rebellion to collapse. Their claim to independence was denied, their commissioners were refused a hearing, yet not an angry word, provoking threat, nor harmful act had come from President Lincoln. He had promised them peace, protection, freedom from irritation, had offered them the benefit of the mails. Even now all he proposed to do was, not to send guns or ammunition or men to Sumter, but only bread and provisions to Anderson and his soldiers. His prudent policy placed them in the exact attitude described a month earlier in his inaugural. They could have no conflict without being themselves the aggressors. But the rebellion was organized by ambitious men with desperate intentions. A member of the Alabama legislature, present at Montgomery, said to Jefferson Davis and 3 members of his cabinet, "Gentlemen, unless you sprinkle blood in the face of the people of Alabama, they will be back in the old Union in less than 10 days." And the sanguinary advice was adopted. In answer to his question, "What instructions?" Beauregard, on April 10th, was ordered to demand the evacuation of Fort Sumter, and, in case of refusal, to reduce it. The demand was presented to Anderson, who replied that he would evacuate the fort by noon of April 15th, unless assailed, or unless he received supplies or controlling instructions from his government. This answer being unsatisfactory to Beauregard, he sent Anderson notice that he would open fire on Sumter at 4:20 on the morning of April 12th. Promptly at the hour indicated the bombardment was begun. As has been related, the rebel siege works were built on the points of the islands forming the harbor, at distances varying from 1,300 to 2,500 yards, and numbered 19 batteries, with an armament of 47 guns, supported by a land force of from 4,000 to 6,000 volunteers. The disproportion between means of attack and defense was enormous. Sumter, though a work 300 by 350 feet in size, with well-constructed walls and casemates of brick, was in very meager preparation for such a conflict. Of its 48 available guns, only 21 were in the casemates, 27 being on the ramparts in barbette. The garrison consisted of 9 commissioned officers, 68 non-commissioned officers and privates, 8 musicians, and 43 non-combatant workmen compelled by the besiegers to remain to